Emily received a mysterious package containing 4 videotapes, each recording every significant moment of her life from infancy to the present, but the content of the 4th tape sent chills down her spine. It seemed to predict her future. Who sent these tapes? Why would they document Emily's entire life? Explore the unknown, uncover the truth. If you crave a racing heart, subscribe to us and uncover the secrets of the Faceless Man together. Soul Trap, Horror and VHS Tapes. Emily stepped off the elevator and walked down the dimly lit hallway of her apartment building, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above echoing in the silence. She fumbled through her bag, her fingers brushing against pans. Her phone and a tray received. Before finally finding our keys standing before her apartment door, Emily inserted a key into the lock. Just as she was about to turn it, a familiar voice called out from down the hall, "Miss Lewis." She turned to see Mr. Jeffrey, the friendly doorman in his 60s, hurrying toward her with a small package in hand. His ever-present smile brightened the otherwise drab corridor. "Good evening, Mr. Jeffrey." Emily greeted, returning a smile. "Evening, Miss Lewis. This arrived for you earlier today," he said, ending over the neatly wrapped parcel. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with a simple white string tied around it. The package had a sense of old-world charm, something you might see in a vintage shop. "Thank you," she replied, taking the package, curiosity piqued. She looked for the sender's name and found that her Uncle Jimmy had sent it. His name and OM address were neatly printed on the white shipping label. "No problem at all. Have a good night," Mr. Jeffrey said, tipping his hat before turning to leave. Emily unlocked her door and stepped into her apartment, the familiar scent of fresh laundry greeting her. She set her back down on the small table by the door and slipped off her shoes, the plush carpet, comforting her tired feet. Holding the package carefully, she moved to the living room and sat on the couch examining the unexpected parcel. She was intrigued as to why her uncle had sent it without giving her a call in advance. It was a little out of his prudent manner. Emily untied a string and peeled back the paper. Revealed beneath was a small ornate box carefully wrapped in bubble wrap. There were so many layers. This better be something important. She thought as she used scissors to cut open the final layer. Her heart beat a little faster as she opened it, wondering what could be inside. To her surprise, the box contained 4 old videotapes along with a note folded neatly beneath the cassettes. Emily unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the typed writing of her uncle, and she was immediately weirded out by the information it contained. "This is our family VHS tape. Please convert this into digital form. For me." It was signed, "Love Dad, Love Dad." Emily murmured, looking at the note, puzzled as to why her uncle signed it Dad. After the tragic car accident that took the lives of her parents, her uncle, Jimmy, took her in and raised her as his daughter when she was just 8 years old. So technically on paper, her uncle was her dad since he had adopted Emily. However, she had never referred to him as Dad, but always called him Uncle or simply by his name, Jimmy. She put down the paper note, still feeling confused, and went over the tapes, running her fingers over the faded labels noted in order: past 1, past 2, past 3 and future. The first 3 tapes looked old. Their plastic casings had yellowed and were scuffed from use over time. In contrast, the last one looked new, as if it had been created yesterday. Curious to see what memorable family moments were recorded on the tapes, Emily moved to her old VCR player tucked away in a corner of the room. She then set up her camera in front of the screen to capture the video. Finally, she inserted the first tap and pressed play, as the grainy analog images flickered to life on the screen. Emily was transported back in time. The first ST contained footage of her, as a newborn baby taking her first wobbly steps, her dad standing to the side clapping to encourage her forward with each UN step. Her parents cheered her on until she finally nestled into her mother's arms. The RT-double-wearing record of her first little accomplishment in life made Emily smile and tears welled up in her eyes. She watched it with great appreciation, pondering whether it was her uncle what captured his precious moment for her, and completely forgotten about the weird note. Earlier, without hesitation, she loaded the second tape. The second tape showed Cass how diligently practicing her guitar for a local talent show. Emily cringed at the sight of her awkward teenage self, but she couldn't help smiling at the determination in her eyes. Her uncle walked in and teased her immediately. The middle school edgy Emily stopped practicing and shot him a look of frustration and annoyance. Her uncle burst into laughter and the tape was abruptly cut short. Emily took out the second cassette and put in the third. The screen brightened with the same fuzzy and blurry signature of an analog video, but this time her delightful smile gradually faded. The third tape captured the bittersweet moment as Emily bade farewell to her uncle before getting in a cab to go to the airport for our university enrollment. The tape stopped right at the moment the car began to move forward. At first glance, the content the tape displayed was seemingly normal, until Emily noticed the peculiar angle of it. The footage was being filmed from far behind, someone hiding in the bushes, as if they were stalking her and Uncle Jimmy. When the screen went blank again, she moved to the camera to check the recordings of the first two tapes. An uneasy feeling began to creep into her heart, as she noticed the strange angles from which those two tapes were filmed. They were all so eerie. The first day was filmed from a high, distant viewpoint, as if someone were peering down for Holmes' window. The second one was also filmed from a far distance, but it was zoomed with a horizontal camera position, as if the stalker might have been sitting in their car recording Emily in her uncle's garage. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the last tape labeled Future. Her mind raced with questions that a part of her did not want to know the answer to. What could be on the future tape? Should she continue watching or call the police? Who recorded these tapes and for what purpose? What do they want? Despite the growing fear in her gut, Emily inserted the fourth tape into the VCR, her heart pounding in her chest as she pressed play. The screen flickered to life once more, but this time the image was different. It wasn't a scene from her past anymore. It was her in the present sitting alone in white empty room. Her posture was uptight and her hand resting comfortably on her thigh, and Emily was smiling. A mad, unsettling smile like that of a junkie who had sniffed too many drugs. The camera abruptly zoomed in on the face of Emily's alter S, and what happened next made her feel sick to her stomach. On the screen, the imposter began peeling in the skin of its face. Strangely, not a single drop of blood appeared during the whole horrifying process. Instead of a bloody skinless face, the aftermath revealed a completely smooth surface of bare skin without any recognizable facial features. Emily's eyes were glued to the screen, even after the reel had finished. Her whole body froze on the couch. Terrified by the insanity she had just witnessed, it took her a while before she could regain her senses. Then Emily grabbed her phone and dialed her uncle's number, her heart pounding like thunder in her ears with each agonizing ring. Finally he answered. "Jimmy." She gasped, her voice shaking with fear. "Did you send me those tapes?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before our uncle responded. His voice tinged with confusion. "Tapes? What tapes?" "Emily. I didn't send you anything." Emily's blood ran cold as she realized the terrifying truth. She had been stalked for almost her entire life, ever since she was just a baby. But this explanation only made sense for the first 3 tapes about her past. What about the 4th tape depicting her future? What would happen to her? The last ST was the real horror, but it was too abstract for her to understand. Was it a metaphor for her death? Emily ended the call without clarifying any further to her. Uncle gathered all the tapes into the ornate box and put them inside her backpack along with the camera. She then went to her closet, reached for the top shelf and retrieved an Adidas shoebox where she carefully kept her shotgun. Emily loaded the gun and pushed it down into the back waistband of her jeans. This might do it, she reassured herself. The gun gave her a slight sense of security as she left the apartment and headed to the police station. Emily arrived at the police station, and just 15 minutes approaching the front desk, her hands trembled slightly as she explained her situation to the officer on duty. "I need to report a case of stalking," she said, her voice quivering with fear. She pulled out her camera and handed it to the officer as proof of a claim someone has been recording and watching me for years. "I don't know who they are or what they want, but I'm terrified." The officer listened intently as Emily recounted the events of the past few hours, from the arrival of the mysterious package to the horrifying revelation of the tape depicting our past and future. He nodded gravely, scribbling notes on a pad of paper as she spoke. "We'll do everything we can to help you, Miss Lewis," he said, his tone reassuring, "but for your safety, I would advise you to stay somewhere else tonight. We can't arrange for a full seat to keep an eye on your apartment until we have more information." Emily nodded, grateful for the officer's concern. She knew she couldn't stay in her apartment any longer, not with the threat of stalker looming over her. With a heavy heart, she asked the officers for a ride to her best friend's house, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. After filling out the necessary paperwork, she walked to the parking lot with a policeman. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, signaling an incoming call. She pulled it out and saw that it was her best friend, Sarah. With a sigh of relief, she answered a call, grateful for the distraction from her troubled thoughts. "Hey, Sarah," she said, her voice sounding more composed, and she felt, "What's up?" "Hey, Emily, you forgot our weekend hangout." Sarah's cheerful voice came through the phone, a welcome respite from the darkness that had consumed Emily's thoughts. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should burden her friend with the details of her ordeal, but she couldn't bear to go through all of this alone. She realized she didn't need to inform her friend of every gruesome detail. Simply explaining her current situation would suffice, plus she needed a place to stay for the night. Regardless, gathering a resolve, she decided to confide in her friend, hoping for comfort and support during this difficult time. "Yeah, we are still on," Emily said, her voice steady. "There's something I need to talk to you about. Can we meet up our usual restaurant?" "Of course," Zara replied, her tone growing more serious. "Is everything okay?" Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "I'll tell you everything when I see you," she said, and their call landed. She gave the police officer the restaurant's address and made sure to thank him for the ride before stepping out of the patrol car, feeling much more secure, as she was now surrounded by a big bustling crowd. "Hey," Emily heard the policeman call out from behind. She looked over her shoulder and saw a bizarre smirk on his face. He remarked, "Emily, you cannot run away from the faceless man. You cannot run away from us." He suddenly threatened, then casually drove off, leaving Emily stunned in disbelief. Her poor heart, just at ease a moment ago now, started to race uncontrollably in her chest. Emily stood frozen on the sidewalk, the police officer's word echoing in her mind. The world around her seemed to blur as fear searched for veins. What did that mean? Who is a faceless man and us who is US, reaching for the gun still attached behind her hip? Emily took a deep breath, pushing the fear down and focusing on the immediate task at hand. She needed to find Sarah, to explain everything and ask for a safe shelter. Emily walked briskly to the entrance of the restaurant, her eyes scanning the crowd inside for her friend as she stepped through the door. The warm, familiar ambience of the restaurant greeted her. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversations, and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. Emily spotted Sarah, at their usual table by the window, chatting animatedly with someone. Emily's heart sank as she noticed the uncanny resemblance between the woman and herself. Even with the woman's back to her, Emily could still recognize that long dark hair and the familiar posture. It was like looking at a mirror image. Worried for his friend's safety, Emily hurried toward the table where a friend was sitting with the imposter, her pulse quickening with each step. It was a Saturday night, so the restaurant was full of people. She hustled through the crowd trying to keep her eyes glued to the imposter back. She brushed past a woman cutting her off abruptly without looking back to apologize. Then she stumbled into a tall man who nodded at her in apology. She ignored him and quickly moved out of his way, looking back at her friend's table. To her surprise, the woman was already gone. It was as if she had vanished to thin air. Emily's heart raced as she glanced around the restaurant, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure, but there was none. Sarah, she called out her friend's name as she approached the table, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Emily, you just went to the bathroom." "A second ago," Sarah exclaimed, gesturing to the back of the restaurant where the bathroom was located, confused to see her friend standing in front of her again in the opposite direction from where she had just gone. "How did you come back so fast? Did you just take a detour and go around this restaurant?" "Sarah, who are you talking to just now?" Emily asked, straight to the point, trying to keep her voice steady. Sarah frowned, looking around. "You. I was talking to you, Emily." "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you all right?" Emily sank into the chair opposite Sarah, her mind reeling. "Sarah, something very strange is happening. Someone delivered a package to me containing these creepy tapes of them filming me from afar. Ever since I was a kid, someone's been stalking me, and I think they are still watching." She hesitated, unsure whether to reveal everything to her friend. The scene of the imposter, what just sat in our seat a second ago, was too surreal to comprehend. Was it real or just a hallucination? Filled by fear, for the past few hours, she felt like she was living in a dream filled with irrational incidents. She couldn't make sense of what has she gotten herself into lately. Noticing Emily's reluctant speech, her friend reached across the table and took Emily's hands in hers. "It's okay, you can tell me we are friends." Hearing reassuring words from Sarah calmed her mind a bit, but she chose not to tell her friend about all the creepy and unbelievable things she had just experienced, for even Emily couldn't find any suitable answers for them without sounding like a madwoman. "I'm not sure, Sarah. I realized I'm being stalked, and since then I keep running into weird occurrences. I feel like I'm being watched everywhere I go." Emily said, hugging herself. "I need a new place to stay. My apartment is not safe anymore," she admitted. "Of course you can stay at my place," Sarah said, smiling at Emily, then asked, "Do you report to the police?" Emily nodded, but honestly, after the dreadful interaction with the officer earlier, she wasn't sure who to trust. "You cannot run from us." The police's terrifying words echoed in her head once more, and the possibility of a vile group of men haunting her made Emily shiver in fear. "Can we talk about got something else now? How's your PhD thesis going?" she asked her friend, hoping that changing the subject would distract her from the nightmare she was in, even if just for a few minutes. The dinner went on with mostly Sarah talking, and even though Emily tried her best to engage more in the conversation, her mind remained in a state of constant vigilance. Occasionally the hair on the back of her neck stood up, as she felt like someone was watching her. But when she turned her head, all she could see was a crowd of people chatting and eating their meals. They quickly paid the bills and left the restaurant after finishing their meal and talking for more than an hour, sticking close to the bustling crowd outside. They walked for a few blocks until they reached Sarah's apartment building, a modern, secure complex with a doorman at the entrance. Once inside, they headed straight to Sarah's apartment. Emily felt a small measure of relief as they entered a cozy, familiar space. Sarah locked the door behind them and drew the curtains, creating a barrier between them and the outside world. "All right," Sarah said, guiding Emily to the bedroom. "You must be exhausted today. Use my clothes to change and rest a bit." "Okay, you're safe in here," her friend suggested, and she followed. Emily put her gun under the pitya and lay in the soft warm bed trying to get some sleep. But she couldn't, as her brain uncontrollably began to rewind the events in detail. From the moment she received Mrs. Package to the horrifying revelation of the fourth tape, the threat from the Poken, and the imposter sitting with her friend. There were so many plot holes that made her confused, but there was one thing Emily knew for certain: she was not dealing with only one stalker. There must be a group of them, some sort of evil cult. A cult of faceless man, she presumed, and that was the only explanation she could come up with. She wondered why they had chosen her, what was their intention, feeling the need to gather more information. Emily sat up and got out of bed. She searched for a laptop, which had been left in her backpack ever since she came home from work, quietly leaving the bedroom. She entered the living room sitting on the couch. She turned on the laptop and typed the word "faceless man" into the search bar. Millions of results appeared in just half a second, but most of them were just YouTube horror videos or scary stories on Reddit and other websites clearly untrue. She clicked to the next page to see other results, but still no clues emerged. Emily changed the keyword to "marked by faceless man," and with her first click, a post from a man asking for help appeared. Emily was shocked to learn how much this story resembled our situation. He also received weird tapes, saw a parallel of himself in public places, and was constantly harassed by people with no faces. This is the one, she thought, clicking into his account to look for more information about the man, but it was a fake account, with the only update being his for help. There were no personal details she could track down to find a man's real identity, or what happened to him. She clicked back to the post and read the comment section. Most of them were convinced that the man should see a therapist or turn to Christ for salvation. Others dismissed the post as a made-up story. However, a minority of people were giving out warnings. One comment caught her attention. "A friend of mine told me to same story as yours, but I didn't believe her now. She's been missing for years, probably dead by now. If you haven't seen the face this man, then you still have some time left, but if you've already seen him, then your time is up. You will come, not only for you, but also for your family, and all the people you love. You will kill them all until there's no trace of you left on this earth. That's how he owns you. That's how he traps your soul." Emily's body shook uncontrollably when she read this random comment on the internet. She didn't know if this information was reliable or not, but still she reached for a phone on the table to call her uncle and warn him and his family of this possible danger. Emily bit her fingernail anxiously as she waited for him to pick up. The ringing tone kept rising in the silent room, with its slow rhythm almost driving her insane. No one answered her call, and she dialed her uncle's number again, after another agonizing wait. No familiar reply spoke up from the other side, only the automated voice suggesting she call again. Later disappointed and worded sick, she gave up the idea of calling and decided to drive to her uncle's place to explain everything to him in person. It might not be wise to wander around in the dark with her stalkers lurking in every corner, but she couldn't let her uncle's life and his family be at risk. While she did nothing, Emily turned thinking of waking our friend up for a drive, but there was no need to disturb her friend's sleep, as Sarah was already up and standing in the hallway leading to the bedroom. "Sarah, did I wake you up?" Emily cautiously asked, but her friends remained unfazed, standing there in the dark. Emily's heart thrilled again with fear and urgency, as she came to realize that the figure standing there was certainly not her friend. The figure launched at her without warning and Emily instinctively darted to the door, but it was too late. "The fake!" Sarah pushed her to the ground and wrapped her hands around Emily's neck. She struggled to escape, but to no avail. Desperately, Emily rolled her eyes, searching for any nearby weapon, and she spotted a baseball that her friend had prepared beforehand for dangerous situations. It stood against the shoe cabinet, just a few steps away from her. She reached her arms out, struggling to move upward inch by inch. Just as she was about to run out of breath, her attacker suddenly stopped and felt right beside her, weak and lifeless, like a puppet with its strings cut. Emily sat up in the hallway, dimly lit by the street light. The yellow blurry light shone through the window, revealing the identity of her attacker, but it had no face at all terrifying. Emily went to the bedroom searching for a gun, and ran out of the apartment, without knowing the real danger was waiting for her. Outside there, the man stood in his black suit, abnormally tall but slender. His egg-shaped head was white, shining under the shimmering light of the corridor, revealing nothing but smooth skin. He had no hair, no ears, no mouth, no nose, nothing. Emily yelled out when her eyes caught sight of him, as she sprinted for her life to the elevator. The light bulbs above her head flickered continuously desperately. She pushed the elevator button, wishing for it to open right away, but it remained closed. Despite her prayer, the faceless men calmly walked toward her, getting closer and closer each time the light went on and off. Emily thought of using her gun again. The elevator door finally opened, offering her a precious way out of all this madness. She rushed in and pushed a button for the first floor and the closed button. The door gradually closed, and the last thing she saw was the slender figure still slowly taking its steps toward her from quite a far distance, as if he had all the time in the world. She got out of the metal box and ran out of the apartment building. There, parked ahead of her, was a taxi cab. She hardly approached it and pushed a businessman aside to get in the car, pointing her gun at the driver. "Get out of the car now, so I don't have to hurt you," she grunted, making herself sound clear. The taxi driver looked at her in shock, hastily giving up his seat for her. Emily closed both car doors and drove away. Her uncle's house was just in the rear area of the city. It might take her about 40 minutes, or even sooner, to get there, as the night had deepened and the street had become deserted as family expected. She reached her destination in just a 25-minute drive. Hurriedly she got out of the car without bothering to close it or turn off the engine. She went to the front door of the house and banged hard on its wooden surface. "Uncle Jimmy!" she shouted, keeping on pounding the door. Jimmy, it could not be that no one was home at something up to them. Her patience were thin, with all the assumptions that popped in her head, and Emily decided to look for the nearest window, using her elbow to break into the kitchen. Emily's heart raced as she climbed through the broken window and into the darkened kitchen. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she pulled out her gun and slowly inspected the house. As she stepped into the living room, her eyes scanned the dimly lit space, searching for any sign of movement or life, and suddenly, in the center of the room, 4 shadows stood up. Her heart dropped, presenting in front of her. Right now was her uncle's family. Their heads slowly turning to look at her, and they raised their hands pointing at her all at the same time. Their eyes were wide open but unseeing, and their faces were devoid of expressions. It was as if they had been turned into statues. "You finally came," her uncle said, sounding like a robot, or a soul PPP had been controlled. A sense of dread washed over Emily as she reached out to touch her uncle's shoulder, but she recoiled when she felt how unnaturally cold his skin was. Panic threatened consumer as she struggled to comprehend what was happening. Then a whisper echoed through the room, sending shivers down her spine. She spun around her hand, instinctively raising her gun for defense, but there was no one there, just the eerie silence of the empty house. "Hailey!" The whisper came again, closer, this time as if it were right beside her. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice quivering with fear. No reply came. But emerging from the dark behind the 4 figures, who used to be her last family members, standing tall was the faceless man. Emily pulled the trigger, but the bullet went through the man's body and hit the wall behind him. She desperately blasted the gun, mindlessly as if it was her only hope, but again and again she wasted the bullets, only hitting the wall. The man's flesh seemed to be made out of mud. Whenever a bullet flew toward the tall shadow, its body absorbed the bullet and sent it to the other side. Her gun eventually ran out of bullets, and just as Emily turned her feet intending to escape, the air surrounding her grew thick, as if it was made out of solid rock, blocking every movement of the poor young girl. She could not move an inch with just a pull of the string. The faceless figures moved to make way for the faceless man slowly approaching Emily. Her soul was thrown into a pit of despair, as she helplessly watched the terrifying figure draw toward her. He then knelt before Emily, holding her lean face with its long cold fingers. Emily's eyes opened wide. Her breath ran short and her whole body quivered in terror, as she witnessed the egg-like head of the man cracking open, revealing beneath the thick pale skin was light. A bright white source of light, almost horrifically divine, completely drew all of her attention toward it. Her fear vanished and her body felt light floating. She was floating as the source of her life was being absorbed bit by bit, and the last thing Emily could remember was her gradually falling to sleep blank. She woke up and felt nothing but the cold and the void inside her heart. Something was missing. Emily lifted her finger to touch her face, but there was nothing to touch or feel, just the cool, smooth skin of someone who was no longer Emily, of someone whose identity was being stolen. She needed to find her face. She wanted her face back, consumed by the devastating reality. The woman with no face wanted to scream out loud, but how could she? Had no mouth now. If you enjoyed this suspenseful adventure, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. More excitement is about to be revealed.